Welcome to the next episode of the Ohio Lodge of Researchers podcast, OLR Connections. Today we sit down with the outgoing master of the lodge, Right Worshipful Brother Chad Kopenski, who is joined by the newly elected master, Worshipful Brother Michael Miller, as they discuss many of the typical topics of the lodge, such as education and research, but they also consider some of the upcoming events and things that we may expect from the Ohio Lodge of Research in the year to come.
So why did you end up joining the Lodge of Research? I mean,
Um, I want to say I was at a grand communication and was, I think it was in Marietta of all places. Um, it was an unmanned table at the time, but it had a bunch of the proceedings. And I was flipping through some of those old books and realizing, oh my gosh, there's so much more information out here. And my plan was, after my year in the East, I would jump into the LEO position because the brother who was currently doing it, it was kind of one of those we need somebody and you're the guy.
yeah,
And unfortunately, his wife had passed away from COVID, and he had two kids to take care of, and so I kind of was doing Worshipful Master and LEO at the same time, and I stumbled upon that and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so many good resources in here and you can't beat the price of $50 for a lifetime membership. Um, Shameless plug there. If you're not a member, please
thank you.
join.
Yeah, you're good.
Um, and I mean, I was completely satisfied with just the resources. And then you throw in the meetings and, you know, I don't think I've been to any of them that was like, oh my gosh, this is boring. Every topic has been vastly different, but very good. One of the things that David did a couple years ago, the med talks, we'll see what happens. I'd like to get that going again, but we'll see how many guys we can get together and plan something. But um, again, that was such a variety of speakers from different jurisdictions, different parts of the state, Prince Hall. I mean, there was just so much variety in that. So like to get some of that going again. We've got some different ideas. One
Um,
of the ideas that got brought up the other day was potentially doing like a festive board for one of the in-person meetings. I've never been to a festive board, but that could certainly be
seriously,
interesting. No, I have not. Every time one has came up, I've always had something else going on. The downside of being busy.
I'm glad that I got to be the Master Lodge of Research. I really was. But I I had a lot of grand plans, and I didn't accomplish half of what I wanted to accomplish. One thing that I did not do that I would encourage you to do is um, communicate and delegate. You've got some great people around you.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely got a good officer line right now, and so I will more than likely lean on them. Hopefully, not too much, but lean on them a little bit to get through and use their skill sets to help make the Lodge of Research better. I'm with you. I
So
have to delegate, and that's hard for me because I don't like to ask people to do something that I'm not willing to do myself, and that's just how I've been, and that has been tough for me. Even as district president, I'd rather just do it and know that it's done, and then instead of having the phone tag somebody 20 times, hey, did you get that done yet? Did you get that done yet?
yeah, it's difficult when your success depends on somebody else. Like that's always been difficult for me. But it's something. It's something up here where you don't want to bother people, but
If we say it's going to happen, we want to know that it's going to happen. I
yeah,
think that's what it is. I don't know if I would say ego. It's just if you say something's going to happen, our word's supposed to mean something to us, especially as a Mason.
I realize you're still kind of formulating, and I imagine that like it was for many of us. It's like, oh wait, what now? I'm Master of the Lodge of Research. What now? Um, I guess what are you thinking? What would be ideal, or what do you what are you hoping continues? What do you want to make
Um,
happen?
so I definitely love the fact that especially since COVID, that we've had online education meetings that allows people who can't travel to be engaged. It allows more people who may not have the time to travel 2 to 3 hours to be engaged. One of the things when I went to William and Ware Lodge of Research, it was so interesting because there was guys from Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, I mean, all over that came for just that meeting. And then we've had a couple of Lodge of Research education, meetings on Zoom that we've had guys from all over show up on that one just as well. So to know that we're there and we definitely have the connection that reaches out, I definitely want to keep that stuff going. Um, Education or the discussions that we've done online, I think are very good. It definitely helps guys be engaged. It gives them an opportunity to speak instead of waiting towards the end and waiting, to ask questions and whatnot. It might help them along with finishing whatever they're working on. But one of the things that Jess Raines did that I really liked during COVID, and I don't know, maybe it's an idea to incorporate that in the discussions, is that he would have like a topic and he would tell you about it a week or so ahead of time and find as much information as you can. And when we have our discussion, I want you to talk about it. I'm not here to tell you what it is and what's right and what's wrong. I want you to look up the information. And so maybe that's a way to encourage guys to do a little bit of research and formulate their own ideas on certain things within our craft. And so maybe that's something that I would like to incorporate.
What helped me is Dave and a lot of the guys are like, okay, these are the ones, these are the have tos, these are the want tos. At
Yeah.
least, pick a date and go. And a lot of times we talk about education, right, here in the Lodge of Research.
Uh-huh.
But really, is there a difference between education and research? I mean, or is there a line there? Like, are we?
I think there's a line, right? Education can be learning from experience versus research where you've taken the time to try to look something up. Um, is it an experience in itself? Sure. But there's more effort, I think, going into maybe research than maybe education.
I guess I want you to keep going because I guess I haven't thought about it this way in a while. Is it is it the
So if
intention, like,
so I
or
think with research, right, you have a topic that whatever it is that you want to learn more about. So you may be asking around, you may be flipping through books, clicking through the computer, to find out multiple resources to validate your conclusions and things like that. Where education, I mean, anybody can be educated, right? You could sit in a classroom and someone could educate you on something you didn't know, or you could have an experience that you learned something from, which would I would say fall under education.
if you were a Masonic educator, it almost seems like the intention is external, right? You're trying to teach your brethren something. And I'm wondering if Masonic research is a different intention or a different direction.
I think it would depend on the topic, right?
Okay.
If someone is doing the research on, say, an individual in history because maybe it's a family member or a prominent figure, they can certainly do the research and educate the brethren with a presentation. But is a brother going to be able to apply that known education, right? I mean, you could take a test on it, but we're not taking tests at Lodge of Research. So it's knowledge and education, but is it applicable? If the guy did something that in his life that you could maybe replicate and apply to your life, sure. Um, I don't know. That is a tough question, though.
I don't know that I have a good answer. Um, so, I guess the next thing is that then what do you think qualifies as research? Is it a guy looking through old copyright ledgers and writing a paper? Is it a presentation? Is it just finding the answer? Like where does it start? Where does it end?
So, like, if it was a Masonic education, I would think that it would be something specific to maybe the ritual or a part of the ritual. And then if you wanted to make that into a research thing, right? Well, why are we doing this in the ritual? When did that start? What was going on at the time that this ritual was written? Does this word mean the same thing? And so going down that and maybe again listing your resources, that would be maybe a little bit more applicable if you know. But so like I've kind of gone down rabbit holes. I think that we take for granted the education of some of the guys that put together this. Like I almost wonder if it was just like you said, incidental. And oh yeah, you could apply a symbolism to that, but this is the only thing that we have to carry light, right? Or well, we're meeting on the night of a full moon because it's the brightest night of the year, and street lights aren't invented yet, so this is what we're doing. This is when we're going to meet. Um, yeah, that's the easy answer, right? I think a lot of those guys were way smarter than sometimes what we give them credit for. Um, if I've went down those rabbit holes too of looking up, um, funeral processions and things like that. A lot of times they happened on nights of the full moon, and it could be for the same reasons of it was just the only well lit path, and same thing with lanterns being used in processions and things like that. But then if you really dig down to a lot of ceremonies where lanterns and things like that were in play, a lot of those were a part of ancient cultures and stuff like that of having these events on the nights of full moons. And so then we change from meeting on the night of a full moon because the first Monday of the month is just easier to remember. I don't know. Some of that stuff is just interesting to go down. It makes you wonder if there's other significance that's been forgotten.
150 years ago, the concept of time, like how many people actually had
Right.
clocks or watches? I mean, if you're
Sure.
a farmer, you got, and it's not that they're ignorant necessarily. I mean, they understand the concept of time, but I mean, it's when the sun comes up and when it goes down means a lot. The phases of the moon are something that you know about because
Mm-hmm.
it's a way that you do mark time and the way that you do, you know,
Start the harvest, crops, everything.
yeah.
Right. It is very applicable to their time. Sure.
And so, I'm sure there's we can talk about the symbolism of it, but even just the practicality of this is how we mark time and seasons and the passage of this, that, and the other thing. So, but
Sorry.
good. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I'm sorry. I digress. I go into these rabbit holes, and then
No,
that's what makes me look up stuff later on too.
that's the best part of these podcasts is all of a sudden, we need to go down a rabbit hole and you start thinking about something. Oh, wait, how does this work? Um, I think one of the things you caught on, which to me is, I don't know, it is amazing, is um, we take so many things for granted in our lodges. We talked about this about being in that bubble, right? That uh, you walk by something in your lodge, uh, how many, hundreds of times, and you think nothing of it, but it's it's actually something really kind of cool or special, not something that everybody else has.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah, I don't. We take so many things in our why we do certain things are just kind of granted. We get an answer like, oh, okay, that works. So,
Well, it's like I'm sure we've all heard dozens and dozens of times of preserving our ancient landmarks. What are our ancient landmarks? How many guys can answer that? Right.
well, what qualifies as a landmark?
Right.
Yeah, people don't know what the ancient landmarks are. Not at all. And they've changed over time, and kind of going back to education, for a second.
Yeah, sure.
What is it that, what are your, I want to ask, what are like the foundational things for you? What are the books? What are the documents? What are the things that, really kind of meant a lot to you in your Masonic education?
Man, that's a tough one because
And
I'm very well rounded. So certain things will appeal to me at certain times where I'll start it a book
okay,
and then I won't pick it up for a couple months later. Um, the meaning of Masonry was obviously a good one. I kind of got into that because of the Royal Schofield Society, and that one kind of reiterated the fact that, man, we're talking about the same stuff 200 years ago that we're still debating these today. And so, but that was the other thing too, was going back and reading some of that Masonic literature, especially the older stuff. We take for granted that, well, this guy was a farmer with a sixth grade education, reading education. And then you read some of the stuff they wrote, like, whoa, they were really articulate. They were, they were pretty good. So I know I'm digressing again. I'm like on a roll here for going down hills, but
you're fine.
there's just so much information and so many of these different books. I really liked Bizak's one that I picked up at Med Talks. The was it the canker worm on the rose? It definitely helps put some appreciation to Ohio ritual as far as having a standardization. I've gone down some rabbit holes where I went to the archives, usarchives.gov, and have skimmed through some of Hitler's propaganda for anti-Masonry stuff, and you can certainly see the importance of that. The Grand College of Rites has all the archived, defunct ritual that's out there, and so it's interesting if you flip through some of that stuff and how you can piece some things together of how things may have went. If you read Hitler's literature and believed what he was putting out there against Masonry, but then you look at some of the ritual, some of the things that could potentially have been going on in Germany at that time. You got guys in the woods or in the basement with some dark cloaked hoods on and stuff. Yeah, you might believe they were doing some funky devil worshiping, whatever. So a lot of that stuff has been very influential as far as um, understanding the importance of our standardized ritual, right? Why you should not necessarily change a word for convenience or whatever, because you could completely change the meaning of it.
The argument there, of course, is, when it comes to ritual, and I think you and I have had this conversation. It's what's more important, the meaning or the text?
Mm-hmm.
It's, is it important that you know the story of Hamlet, or is it really important that you know the story of Hamlet the way that Shakespeare wrote it and his audience experienced it? Like, which is,
Right.
and that's a, there's no answer to that argument. Um,
Yeah. People are going to take different things from it depending on how they view it and where they are in their life. They're going to pick up on different things. So you're absolutely right.
well, and at some point, the language becomes a barrier, right? Um, if we were using Old English that is not pronounced or uses very different language than our current, you know, yes, we're not getting the same degree experience that somebody back in the 1200s did, at least not the way that they did. We're getting it, that modern interpretation. There's no good, it's one of those questions to answer. So the
Right.
books that really influenced you in Masonry were the history books or the,
When I was in school, I didn't, maybe it was just how it was presented as far as, oh, hey, you have to memorize this for a test. The history wasn't really as appealing as it is now. Now, being a Mason and having some connections to specific events and specific individuals, it definitely makes it more interesting. I'll give you an example. The ancestry stuff of the great great, I think it's 3 times great grandpa that I was telling you about from Beaver Lodge. It was documented that he was at the Mexican War down in Veracruz.
Oh,
And one of the things that I like randomly stumbled upon prior to that knowledge was that I think that was the first time that it was documented that one Mason had killed another.
oh wow.
I think I don't. If somebody's got a better answer, then by all means. But it happened down there in Veracruz. The guy who was president was killed by the guy who replaced him, and so it's kind of cool that not only was he a Mason, but he was also at such a historical event and a historical event in Masonry where it's documented that one Mason had killed another. And then, of course, the whole Civil War, books are always fascinating too. As far as prisoners of war being captured and then let go because they were Masons, and
Right.
paying for their funerals or paying for their bodies to be shipped back to their family. They're doing Masonic, funerals and things like that on the spot. I mean, some of that stuff is just so fascinating. I think it says a lot about our fraternity and what it's supposed to be.
Are there books that aren't necessarily Masonic in nature that helped you understand Masonry? Besides, like, a volume of sacred law type of thing, but
Um, I've went down some rabbit holes. I don't know if it's necessarily ties to Masonry. I mean, I had Art of War on audiobook. I mean, that's the easiest way to
Sun
get through
Tzu. Mhm.
that. I went through one not too long ago. I got to look at my playlist to tell you the exact title, but it was in regards to the Hell's Angels. That was so having done policing, that was kind of an interesting. Um, it was about Sonny Barger. I think that was the founder.
Yeah, yes.
It was actually a pretty good book.
What
Might
did
have.
that teach you about Masonry or help you understand Masonry better?
I don't know if it was necessarily about Masonry, but it was definitely, you have a guy who, whether what he said or didn't say is true or not, right? Because he has a reputation of being, this biker outlaw, and so you have to take for granted what he says, or whether it's true or not. Um, but Masonry can be like that too, right? I suppose. You have some people who, just because they're a brother, doesn't necessarily mean that they're always being truthful. So, I mean, you can loosely apply it to Masonry, but I mean, there's definitely a culture, I would say, with the Hell's Angels and outlaw bikers, right? There's a code that they stick to, no different than Masonry has a code or a band of brotherhood. You can loosely go down rabbit holes.
Two organizations to look at, which are, if you want to look for Masonic connections or inspirations, I mean, yes, I mean, almost every fraternity or sorority you could probably say in some way, shape, or form comes back to us. But there's two that are, I think, a little bit more interesting. Or one are they're called the Chinese Tongs. I may not be pronouncing that correctly, but when um, when Chinese immigrants came over in the latter half of like the 1800s and they settled in this country, you know the they were at a point being immigrants here working for the railroad. They were placed in different parts of the city, and laws were different there because they were definitely right. They were definitely others. I mean, it and I feel, and I'm sure that somebody listening to this is going to get politically upset, and I hope that they won't, because I'm sure I'm telling this wrong, but and it's nuanced and all that stuff. But so, in order to kind of, if the police were going to be, if authority wasn't necessarily going to be treating this these immigrant um, areas uh, fairly, or the law didn't really apply necessarily in like this side of the tracks. In order for them to maintain a society, that and maintain order, basically organized crime came up, and these tongs were these crime syndicates that basically said, okay, we're going to take care of this 7 block area here, or wherever what it is. We're going to, um, we're we're going to mutual protection, mutual aid. Like we're going to make sure that things are safe. If we will have, you know, sin and vice, right? Opium and brothels and whatever, but those are going to be operated over here, and we're not going to use kids. We're not going to so we're going to sort of set things up and maintain the order, maintain the peace. Um, when these tongs were created, in order to kind of give themselves a sort of legitimacy, they adopted Masonic symbolism. And so there are pictures you can find where it'll say, like, you know, whatever, like the Chinese tong of this particular area, or, the and right in the middle will be like a square and compass. Instead of a G in the middle, it will be something else. So it was an air of giving themselves legitimacy, but also to kind of communicate to others, like, okay, we are we are organized crime with a moral code. Um, Similarly, if you look at LA after the Rodney King riots in the 1990s,
Mm-hmm.
when the Bloods and the Crips, as they developed and came together, and the peace accords that kind of came out in the late 90s, it there's evidence to suggest that it's oddly similar, that here are areas of people where the law and order gets applied differently. So there becomes this tribal mentality, like, this is our block, our group, this is us. We have an us and there's a them. For us, we are going to live by a strict particular code, right? We're going to protect our people. We're going to make sure that, if there's anything, right, people are treated fairly, blah, 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 blah. So, and if you look at a lot of gang signs and codes and symbols, man, they often look like a lot of the ciphers that, you see in, you know, the 1800s and 1900s, when we still had, coded ciphers. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion and presentation. But if you want a rabbit hole, seriously, start go looking at that, because it's um, there's a lot of an argument can be made that if there wasn't inspiration or outright, theft. I mean, there's similarities in terms of how this, you know,
Oh, absolutely. I
yeah.
agree.
But I mean, that's sort of, I guess, right, what masonry is supposed to be about, is taking care of brotherly love, belief, and truth, right? We're going to take care of our own and make sure that we are all okay. Right.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I said there's a lot of parallels for sure. I mean, it was a good book for sure. I mean, I'm always a fan of perspective, trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to take something away from it. Like I said, not necessarily, I don't know if that book necessarily reflects masonry by any means, but the stories and the perspective of someone like that is interesting. You could even apply his leadership skills, the way that he took the Hell's Angels, and how do you apply that, right? I mean, he obviously had the trust of his guys to have that kind of backing and support. So, there's definitely some positives and things that you could take and apply.
right now, like, when you are, consuming Masonic media, like, what are the podcasts or the books, the authors, the people that you kind of look towards for?
Well, so podcast, typically Jim Hall, it's always it's always good to hear Jim on there and see who he's interviewing and things like that. Um,
Hell, you probably know half of them.
Surprisingly, there's spurts on there where I don't know as many as I thought that I would sometimes, but it's always a good interview. So I mean, I absolutely love some of Jim's stuff that he has on there. I will say I'm not always up to date. Sometimes I get a month or two behind, and I try to go play catch up. Um, see, I'm trying to scroll through here. I've done some Masonic Muscle is another podcast I'll follow on occasion.
Who are those guys?
Uh, they, I believe, are down in Texas, if I recall right. I've not listened to as much as others. Just time, I got a short 10, 15
Yeah,
minute
short
commute.
commute. Yeah.
Um, I like the Masonic Service Association, the quick talk or the short talk bulletins. Those are good for when you're cutting grass and got some headphones going. Um, One of the things that I always looked into is the Masonic Roundtable. Love those guys. Usually I catch them more on YouTube. That's where I went to for a lot of the sources of my information early on and even before I joined Masonry. Just because again of the perspective of you've got guys from multiple jurisdictions and they're giving their input, and some of the things that they talked about sent me down rabbit holes of things to look up and caught my interest. I think that might even be how I stumbled upon the Grand College of Rights. It might have been brought up in one of their episodes. Um, Local, Dan Harinko's got a few good books out now. I got to get the latest one. I'm slacking. Um, I really enjoyed The Purple of Fraternity. It was a lot of leadership styles. Not exactly what I thought it was going to be when I picked it up. When I picked it up, I thought it was going to be more of like an actual handbook, right, for the district deputy. And so I was like, well, I'm getting ready to go into the East. I'll have some perspective of what it is that they're looking for and expecting out of me. And the book was a lot more about leadership styles, which I was somewhat familiar with from doing the National Society for Leadership and Success, but it was all very applicable to going into a leadership position as well. So it's definitely a good read. Like I think I mentioned earlier, Bizak's stuff is usually pretty good.
Mike Clevenger is also, he had that program called Masons Lead Better.
Yeah.
Um, I think he still has those materials available, but um, for I think a lot of guys, I think that that's a really nice place to start in terms of ref reflecting on masonry, but also then kind of putting it outward, putting it into action. So
Another interesting one though too. I really liked, and I'd be remiss if I didn't throw it out there. Was Alexander Herbert's book on the I'm totally going to butcher the name, Lodge
as
Liberté.
liberté.
Yeah, that was a cool read. It'd be awesome if they would have been able to go back and find those set of working tools and jewels or whatever after the fact. But that was really cool. It brought a lot of light to some of the myths of the the um, brain farting on the name of the flower, but you know what I'm talking about.
Forget me not.
Yeah, the forget me not.
Alex worked hard on that book. And it all started as a presentation for the High Lodge of Research. And yeah, I mean, it started as something he did just kind of on a whim. And the next thing you know, it's become a book. And yeah, it's so wonderful. So
We got a brother in the second district down here, right worshipful brother Jamie Kilburn, trying
I
to
know
convince
Jamie.
him to put his works into a book as well. He's got some interesting family lineage. Byron Kilburn, I think, is
Yep.
a first visitor of Jefferson Lodge, but was working on the Miami Erie Canal, and I think laid out the map of Sandusky and had a town in Wisconsin called Kilburn Town,
Which is part of Milwaukee. He and I
which
talked about that.
yeah, the
Kilburn
Great Wars.
Town, there's a whole war about that. So
That'd be such a good book. That'd be a good read if he puts it all together.
I just want to see him do it. Like that's the thing that I struggle with. I have all this information about Shearer in my head and written down.
Another book that needs to be
Uh,
published. You're
I
putting all the
know, and
work in.
I've given myself a deadline, and I'm trying to plug away. But it's the hard part, I think, is you said it earlier. Like it's never enough. Like you just have to. I realize I just have to write it, and I just have to, just do it. And then, because if I keep trying to go for perfection, it's never going to be done.
Have something documented that is somewhat of a finished piece. There's nothing that says that you can't go back and edit it, have a second edition or anything like that. And then, God forbid something happened to you, you've already laid the foundation for someone else to maybe pick up that work and run with it too, and come at it with a fresh set of eyes. But if you do nothing with it and something happens to you and it sits on your computer and then it gets taken to the Goodwill one day and nobody ever stumbles upon it ever again, then all the work that you did was for nothing.
I told you.